What if the most beautiful World Cup ever was built on the ugliest truth? Beneath the glittering stadiums and global cheers lies a story FIFA doesn't want you to hear. This isn't just about football. It's about lives lost, voices silenced, and ethics sold. Stay till the end. Because once you know what really happened, you'll never see 2022 the same way again. The moment Sepp Blatter opened the envelope in December 2010 and announced, the winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar, the world blinked in disbelief. Not because Qatar was an exotic, unknown land, but because even by FIFA's questionable standards, this felt like a cruel joke played on football itself. How could a country with no real football heritage, blistering summer temperatures, and a population smaller than some suburbs host the planet's biggest sporting event? That question didn't just hover in the air. It roared, echoed, and eventually erupted into a full-blown controversy that still haunts the beautiful game. At first glance, the bid seemed bizarre. Qatar had never qualified for a World Cup. Their national team was a blip on the global football map. The country had only one stadium that could remotely pass as a World Cup venue. Yet, they promised not just stadiums, but architectural marvels built from sand and dreams. In reality, what followed was far darker than any sports fairy tale. What unfolded was a saga of systemic abuse, international bribery, and an inferno of ethical questions that remain unanswered. FIFA has never been a beacon of transparency, but this time it overreached. Of the 22 executive committee members who voted on Qatar's bid, 15 have since been charged or banned. One name rose above the rest: Mohammed bin Hammam, a Qatari football official and the then president of the Asian Football Confederation. Investigations later revealed bin Hammam had wired millions to officials across Africa and Asia. The Somali Football Federation received $100,000. Ganesh Thapa, president of Nepal's FA, received £115,000. These weren't just donations. They were calculated purchases of allegiance. And then there was the $880 million pledged by Al Jazeera, Qatar's state-run broadcaster, to FIFA for broadcasting rights. Money promised in the shadows, tied to the outcome of Qatar's bid. That sum raised a chilling question. Was football being auctioned to the highest bidder? It seemed like it. The rot was undeniable, but the response, deafening silence. This was a World Cup birthing scandal. But even the stench of corruption couldn't drown out the real story. The cost paid by the nameless and the faceless. Qatar is wealthy beyond measure, but that wealth doesn't trickle down. While the elite revel in opulence, the nation runs on the broken backs of migrant workers. 90% of Qatar's population consists of migrants, mostly from South Asia. They came for opportunity. They found something closer to indentured servitude. Men from Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka arrived in Qatar dreaming of wages that could lift their families out of poverty. Recruiters promised them the moon, only to land them in a dystopia of cement and heat. Contracts were rewritten. Salaries were slashed. Some earned as little as $250 a month. They toiled under a punishing sun, working 14 to 18 hours a day. Days off were a fantasy. Rest was a luxury. Safety was a myth. The capitalist system became their invisible prison. Employers confiscated passports. Workers couldn't leave without permission. They were stuck, quite literally, slaves to their job, their location, and their master. If they resisted, they were deported. If they collapsed, they were replaced. And many did collapse. According to The Guardian, over 6,500 migrant workers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka died in Qatar between 2010 and 2021. That figure, while staggering, may still be conservative. Qatari authorities, allergic to accountability, routinely classified deaths as natural causes, acute heart failure, or sudden death syndrome. But these weren't men dying in their sleep. They were collapsing from exhaustion, malnutrition, and sheer overwork. In 70% of the cases, the cause of death was never properly investigated. The deaths were not just tragic, they were avoidable. And yet, FIFA looked away. The same organization that preaches unity and respect embraced a regime that offered neither. To FIFA, progress was a talking point. Qatar had introduced a minimum wage. They said 1,000 Qatari riyals a month, That's $275. But half of that could be deducted for accommodation. That leaves $137. Is that the price of a life? Is that the price of silence? Change, Qatar insisted, was underway. The kafala system had been abolished on paper. But human rights organizations painted a bleaker picture. Employers continued to withhold wages. Passports still went missing. Complaints led nowhere. Legal reforms were cosmetic. Reality remained unchanged. But even beyond labor abuse, Qatar's record raised deeper questions. What does it mean when the biggest sporting celebration in the world is handed to a regime where being gay is illegal and punishable by prison, or worse, where women must seek permission from male guardians to marry, travel, or even work in some sectors, where freedom of speech is a foreign concept and dissent is not debated but detained? In Qatar, homosexuality is criminalized. Advocacy for LGBTQ+ rights is a punishable offense. In 2020, a Nepali worker was unalived by firing squad. The first execution in 17 years. Capital punishment, while rare, is not just a threat on the books. It's a possibility in reality. LGBTQ+ travelers were told they'd be safe as long as they didn't show affection publicly. But safety based on silence is not safety. It's surveillance. Still, defenders of Qatar's World Cup argued, isn't this a chance for reform? Didn't South Africa's World Cup inspire unity? Didn't Russia host in 2018 without imploding? But Russia invaded Ukraine just 4 years later. Journalists were imprisoned. LGBTQ+ people persecuted. So much for progress through football. And now, here we were again, pretending that rainbow armbands and virtue signaling hashtags could dismantle decades of oppression. The 2022 World Cup became a meticulously curated show. Stadiums dazzled. Lights glimmered. The football was sublime. Lionel Messi finally got his crown. Kylian Mbappe reminded the world of his magic. But beyond the pitch, the narrative was sterilized. This wasn't a celebration, it was a distraction. The real Qatar wasn't on display. What the world saw was an illusion, a tightly controlled experience where dissent had no visa. Human rights monitors were blocked. Journalists were threatened. Flags were confiscated. Silence became a condition of entry. And yet, the world tuned in. Billions watched. Sponsors poured in money. And FIFA declared success. But if this is success, what does failure look like? When history writes about the 2022 FIFA World Cup, it won't just recount Argentina's triumph or Morocco's historic run. It will whisper the names of workers buried in unmarked graves. It will recall the journalists silenced. It will reflect on a moment when football's governing body sold its soul for profit and PR. There's a deeper wound in all of this, a moral dislocation. What do we stand for if we can celebrate goals built on corpses? What's the point of the game if it turns a blind eye to suffering? At some point, the ball must stop rolling, and we must look around and ask, was it worth it? It is easy to say that every country has flaws, that no nation is perfect, but imperfection is not the same as systemic abuse. There's a difference between cultural nuance and crimes against humanity. To suggest otherwise is not tolerance, it's cowardice. If apartheid South Africa had bid to host a World Cup, would we say, it's their culture? If a country banned Christianity and executed Muslims, would we say, let's not impose our Western values? The absurdity of comparison reveals the truth. What FIFA did in 2010 was not just corrupt, it was immoral. It sent a message that money trumps ethics, and image beats substance. It told the world that you can buy legitimacy if your check is big enough and your stadiums shine bright enough. It said, play the game, but ignore the screams outside the arena. There was no shortage of defenders. Commentators like Gary Neville hinted at the idea that critics simply didn't understand the culture. But culture should never be used as a smokescreen for injustice. When LGBTQ+ people are forced into hiding, when workers are exploited and discarded like machinery, this isn't culture, it's cruelty. And then there's the hypocrisy. FIFA, draped in rainbow flags, speaks of inclusion, yet they punish players who speak up. They ask for silence in exchange for spectacle. They want applause, not accountability. They celebrate unity while partnering with division. There's a phrase that keeps surfacing. The World Cup is for everyone, but it wasn't. Not in Qatar. Not in 2022. It was for those who conformed, those who looked away, those who swallowed their voice. The rest were left outside, uninvited, unacknowledged, and unheard. This documentary is not an attack on the people of Qatar, nor is it a denial of the beauty of the tournament on the field. It is, however, an indictment of the system that made it happen, of the leaders who closed their eyes, of the journalists who stayed silent, of the fans who cheered without asking why the stadium was so quiet after the final whistle. Because the truth is, there was a cost, a hidden one, and though the final match ended, the story didn't. It lingers in the dust of demolished labor camps. It echoes in courtrooms where whistleblowers are silenced. It lingers in the headlines we've already forgotten, but history won't. The 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar should never have happened. Not because football doesn't belong in the Middle East, but because human suffering should never be the foundation of celebration. Because the game we love deserves better. Because the people who build our dreams should not die for them. The world watched. FIFA smiled. And somewhere in a dimly lit dormitory, a father's photo sits on a cracked phone screen, waiting to be seen again. But he won't return. His dream was buried in concrete. His story was left out of the highlight reel. But not here. Was the 2022 World Cup a triumph for football or a tragedy disguised as progress? Should football ever come at the cost of human dignity? Do you think the world will remember the goals or the silence surrounding the suffering? We want to hear your voice in the comments. And if you believe sports should stand for something greater, subscribe. We're not done telling the truth.